Congressman Jeffries, welcome back to the Fowler Show. Third time's a charm, I guess.
Absolutely.
Right?
Good to see you.
What'd you think tonight?
Well, I thought it was a tremendous address, both in terms of where we have been, where we are now, and where we need to go. He captured sort of the 7 years of his presidency and has been tremendously effective, particularly from an economic standpoint, and he made clear, let's just evaluate the facts of what he's been able to do. 70 consecutive months of private sector job creation. The unemployment rate was over 10% when he took office. Now it's at 5%. He's actually been able to, in partnership with Congress, cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion. 14 million plus Americans who were previously uninsured now have health insurance. These all happened under the Obama presidency. And so we've come a long way from where we started in the depths of the Great Recession. We still obviously have some things that need to be done moving forward, and he also did a great job of laying that out.
And I got to tell you, I think one part of the speech that really, I thought it was a little longer than it should have for a short speech. It was rather long, but I think one that the president did really well was go through and talk about all the things we've been able to accomplish in the past 7 years and really outline what was able to be done, and sometimes in the absence of the lower chamber of the Congress.
That's absolutely correct. In many ways, he was fortunate that he had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate during his first 2 years when we were at the bottom of what had happened when the economy collapsed, and we were really in a place where we could have wound up in an incredibly tough spot. He was able to work in partnership with Democrats in both the House and the Senate to stimulate the economy, to get some things done, and lay the foundation for a successful presidency. In the second half, he's not received a great deal of cooperation from Democrats, from Republicans, and as a result, he's been put into a position where he's had to go it alone in different instances and has been effective, notwithstanding the fact that he's term limited and won't be able to run again.
So now a lot of folks, we just had a Republican on the show, not a segment ago. I disagree with everything he said, but he was on the show anyway. You'll hear tomorrow from all 16 some odd candidates, and you'll also hear from the governor from South Carolina talking about the idea that this president has created this divisive culture in Washington. That's why nothing gets done. What do you say to that?
Well, the divisive culture was created the moment that he took office, when there were people who were determined to make him a one-term president, including Mitch McConnell, who expressed that. And so they never gave him a chance from the beginning. They were in the minority, and their only objective was not to work in the best interest of the American people when President Obama first came to town. It was to seize power for themselves and for the wealthy special interests that they represent. The Tea Party rise in 2010 just exacerbated the dynamic. And in many ways, the civil war that you see in the Republican side of the aisle right now was something that they created because of the hatred that they fostered.
Now, speaking about the Republican side, I haven't had you on the show since we've had a new speaker, right? And this new speaker has been sort of determined to bring Congress back to regular order. Has he done it?
He's actually taken some steps in that direction. It remains to be seen. We still haven't addressed the appropriations part of the process, which is where things had begun to break down in terms of what we refer to as regular order. That is the basic task of funding the government. He's promised for us to proceed in a manner that all members on both the Democratic and Republican side of the aisle, leadership and rank and file members, along with chairs, will have an opportunity to participate in the process on behalf of the people that we represent. And so the jury's still out. He is a man of his word in many ways. I served with him for 2 years on the Budget Committee, and hopefully he will proceed as he has indicated he plans to do.
Now, you're a Democrat, I'm a progressive, and the president spoke for about an hour. Was there one thing in the speech that you did not agree with?
Well, I don't agree with the president as it relates to the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yes,
free trade agreement
for the home team.
Because I think the reality is, though this president is well-intentioned, and I understand his argument that the United States should set the rules of engagement, not China, the reality of the situation is if you look at NAFTA or CAFTA and the history of free trade agreements, they have not worked on behalf of the American people. They have worked on behalf of multinational corporations. And unless this president, who I agree with on a whole host of other issues, can demonstrate to me how TPP will be different, I'm prepared to part ways with him in that particular
Oh, and I actually think you're being nice, right? Because I think what we saw after NAFTA, right, the last trade deal that we signed, I think that what we saw especially with the black community, was that was a canary in the coal mine. When African Americans started losing jobs in record numbers, when Flint fell apart, when Detroit fell apart, and now it seems as though, and I love this president, but I think we seem to be moving in a direction where this is going to be the next step, right? Like, we're going to get rid of all manufacturing in America and shift that, and I just don't know if he has an answer to it, and hopefully we'll see what happens in the Congress.
Yeah, well, what's happening in terms of TPP is that we're talking about 40% of the world's economy in our GDP. It is the mother of all free trade agreements, and that's why we've got to get it right. And I'm not convinced that what has been negotiated right now would actually serve the African American community, communities of color all throughout the country, and for that matter, working class whites and Americans who are struggling each and every day to work hard to put food on the table for their families.
So during the speech, I was live tweeting, and I think there was a part of the speech where I literally tweeted out, well, first of all, I think Joe Biden's the best hype man ever. But two, beyond that,
he's better than Puffy.
He is better than Puffy. And I think beyond that point, I think the president really had a couple of moments where he was just like, how he did the laundry list was just so epically done. He's like, Bin Laden, been there, done that. People on the back of pickup trucks, okay, if you're threatened by them, that's cool. That's on you, I'm not. America's great. I mean, I thought he just did his oratory was just so well done. And I think it speaks to, he's sort of coming into his own in his final year. What do you think?
Absolutely. Well, sophisticated presentation. And I think particularly as it related to this notion that America is in decline as a superpower.
Yeah.
He stated that initially, and no one on the other side of the aisle rose, clapped, or said anything. But then he actually went through the particular facts. We've got the strongest military. All of a sudden, they're on their feet. We've got the fiercest fighters. All of a sudden, they're on their feet. No one in the rest of the world wants to mess with us. They're on their feet. They disagreed with the premise, but the facts that underlie it, they were standing in applause. And I think it was an example of your point of how rhetorically the president executed this speech tremendously, particularly when he would lay out the bullet points to support his fundamental propositions.
So now, I guess the question a lot of folks are asking, right? You've been in Congress, what now, 4 years?
This is my fourth year.
Fourth year. And you've had a tremendous rise. What's next for Congressman Jeffries?
Well, I'm looking forward to fighting hard to get into the majority.
That's such a good answer.
Where I can really work on behalf of the people of the 8th Congressional District.
You've had quite a rise, I got to tell you. From somebody watching on the outside who studies Congress, I mean, from being here 4 years, you've clearly set an agenda for yourself, clearly rose in the Congressional Black Caucus, and seems to be a sort of a player here in the Democratic Caucus. And whether they take the majority or not, we have to get rid of gerrymandering first, right?
Well, absolutely. But mass incarceration has been bad for America. And at the end of the day,
I was getting there.
You got it. And I'm hopeful, and we've been working with Republicans and conservatives and libertarians on the other side of the aisle, that we can get something done and get a bill to the president's desk that reforms our nation's broken
And what does reform look like to you? Because I think that there's a lot of ambiguity in what criminal justice reform truly looks like. If you ask Rand Paul, he's going to say one thing. If you ask Senator Booker, he's going to say something else. What does it look like to you?
Well, we're looking at both front-end reform, which is to stem the tide of the flow of people into the prison system, largely as a result of the failed war on drugs and the mandatory minimums that were put into place, where we sent people away who were nonviolent drug offenders for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, by giving judges no discretion, disproportionately impacting the African American community. That's front-end reform. We've got to change our nation's sentencing laws, and we're in the process of doing that. And then there's back-end reform, which is to make sure that those who are coming out of the prison system have the education, the job training, the ability to successfully re-enter society and be productive citizens and not fall back on the underground economy.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Third year in a row we've had him. I'm pretty sure we'll have him a fourth. Thank you so much for being on the Fowler Show.
Always appreciate it, man.
Have a good one.